The UK is hurtling towards a housing disaster, and the warning signs are everywhere. Labour's ambitious promise to deliver 1.5 million new homes by 2029, touted as the solution to the nation's housing affordability crisis, is now being branded a pipe dream. The shocking reason? The UK doesn't have enough builders to make it happen. Behind the grand announcement lies a crumbling foundation of missing workers, an ageing workforce, and a talent pipeline that has all but dried up. Experts are calling this a national crisis, and the ramifications could leave the government's promises in tatters. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has doubled down on his bold pledge, vowing to bulldoze through planning blockers and push forward sweeping changes to meet the housing targets. But while Labour scrambles to sell its vision of affordable housing to voters, industry leaders are painting a far grimmer picture. Building just 10,000 homes requires 30,000 skilled workers across a dozen trades. For Labour's lofty goal of 300,000 new homes annually, the numbers simply don't add up. The question that hangs over Starmer's promise is a damning one. How can you build homes without builders? The shortfall is staggering. Tens of thousands of skilled workers, bricklayers, carpenters, plumbers and electricians are needed to close the gap. Yet, according to David Thomas, CEO of Barratt Redrow, the UK's largest house builder, the short answer is no. We don't have the workforce. The cracks in the industry's foundations have been decades in the making, exacerbated by Brexit, ageing workers, and a recruitment pipeline that can't keep pace. As the reality sets in, councils across the country are pushing back, calling the housing targets unrealistic and impossible to achieve. The problem begins with the workforce, or lack thereof. For years, the UK's construction industry relied heavily on skilled workers from the EU, particularly from countries like Romania and Poland. With Brexit slamming the door on free movement, that vital labour pool has dried up. Now, more than half of London's construction workforce, which once comprised EU nationals, has vanished. Meanwhile, the remaining workforce is ageing rapidly. A quarter of UK construction workers are over 50, and retirements are steadily shrinking the talent pool. Experts warn that without urgent action, this generational crisis will leave Labour's housing pledge little more than a broken promise. The industry's recruitment efforts have also been woefully inadequate. For years, a cultural bias toward academic routes over vocational training has discouraged young people from entering trades. David Thomas points to the stark contrast between today and the 1960s and 70s, when becoming a tradesperson, whether a plumber, carpenter or electrician, was seen as a respectable career path. Today, despite high wages, experienced bricklayers can earn £45,000 annually, with electricians and plumbers close behind. The sector struggles to attract new blood. The Home Builders Federation, HBF, admits the industry itself is partly to blame, citing poor perceptions of trades, insufficient training opportunities, and a lack of apprenticeships as key barriers. The recruitment crisis has been further compounded by the financial crash of 2008. The HBF estimates that 40 to 50% of skilled workers left the industry following the crash, and those numbers have never recovered. For years, the shortfall was masked by overseas recruitment, particularly from Eastern Europe. Now, with stricter immigration rules in place, the industry is reeling. In hindsight, some industry leaders admit the UK was too dependent on foreign labour, but that reliance, they argue, became the norm because the government failed to prioritise long-term workforce planning. Labour has pledged to address these issues, recently allocating £140 million to create 5,000 construction apprenticeship places annually and setting up home-building skills hubs to fast-track training. But experts warn that these measures barely scratch the surface of what's needed. According to the Construction Industry Training Board, CITB, the UK's current workforce of 2.67 million is simply not enough to meet Labour's ambitious goals. Without tens of thousands of new recruits, the pledge to build 1.5 million homes by 2029 will almost certainly fall short. Local councils, tasked with implementing Labour's housing plan, have already voiced their doubts. Some have labelled the targets unrealistic, while others warn that the government is setting itself up for failure. The think tank Centre for Cities estimates that Labour's plan will fall short by 388,000 homes, even under optimistic conditions. The numbers don't lie. Without a drastic overhaul of recruitment, planning, and production methods, the housing pledge risks becoming yet another unfulfilled political promise. Adding to the controversy is the growing public frustration over the affordability crisis. Labour hopes that building more homes will reduce prices and make buying and renting more accessible, especially for younger generations. But critics argue that even if Labour meets its targets, a big if, the homes will likely be snapped up by property developers and investors, further fueling inequality. The question remains, who will these homes truly serve? While the housing scandal rages on, another crisis is making headlines, a disturbing rise in the use of deepfake technology to exploit victims, mostly women. Conservative peer Baroness Owen has introduced a bill to criminalise the creation and solicitation of sexually explicit deepfakes. But despite the urgency of the issue, the government has delayed action, promising to bring its own legislation next year instead of backing Owen's bill. This delay has sparked outrage, with campaigners accusing ministers of turning a blind eye to a rapidly growing form of abuse. Deepfake technology, which uses AI to alter images and videos, is being weaponized in alarming ways. Baroness Owen revealed that 99% of sexually explicit deepfakes target women, describing the phenomenon as a disproportionately sexist form of abuse. Apps that nudify images are readily available online, making it possible for anyone to create non-consensual intimate images. One app alone processed 600,000 images in its first 3 weeks, while the largest site dedicated to deepfake abuse receives over 13 million hits per month. Baroness Owen's bill seeks to make the creation or solicitation of intimate deepfakes a criminal offence, punishable by up to 6 months in jail. However, the government's failure to back her bill has drawn sharp criticism. Campaigners argue that every day of delay exposes more victims to harm. The Online Safety Act, passed last year, already prohibits the sharing of explicit deepfakes, but it doesn't criminalise their creation. This legal loophole leaves victims vulnerable, forcing them to prove malicious intent, a burden that campaigners say is deeply unfair. Labour has vowed to outlaw deepfakes in its next wave of legislation, but critics say the delay is unacceptable. Baroness Owen warned that the government's inaction amounts to a betrayal of those who need our protection the most. Campaigners are calling for consent-based laws that don't require victims to prove intent, which they say is nearly impossible in most cases. Andrea Simon, director of the End Violence Against Women Coalition, argues that the government is dragging its feet. The public wants to see change. The delay is an insult to victims who suffer in silence. The deepfake crisis is a stark reminder of the darker side of AI's rapid advancement. Baroness Owen summed it up best. Technology has made it possible for women to lose control of their own images, without consent, without warning, and often without recourse. As public pressure mounts, the government faces a choice: act now or risk being seen as complicit in this growing abuse. Both scandals, the housing crisis and the deepfake abuse epidemic, expose the government's troubling pattern of over-promising and under-delivering. Labour's ambitious housing targets are crumbling under the weight of a missing workforce and unrealistic timelines. Meanwhile, victims of deepfake exploitation are left unprotected by a government unwilling to prioritise their safety. As these crises unfold, one thing is clear: promises mean nothing without action. Stay tuned as we continue to uncover the truth behind these scandals and more.